Welcome to the Gab Lab, a show where we tinker with titillating topics and explore the effulgent excellence of existence. We cover a wide range of subjects that are sure to intrigue you, so stick around and stay curious.
Gab Lab.
Welcome back to another episode of the Gab Lab. I'm your host, Michael Wilson. In today's episode, we're talking with Ash Ritter. I really enjoyed this conversation. We did a deep dive on Amanita muscaria. It was a great conversation between two people who have a lot of personal experience with the spirit of Amanita muscaria. If that's something you're interested in, this is definitely a conversation you don't want to miss. Ash Ritter is a West Coast-born, desert-dwelling ethnobotanist, educator, writer, multi-disciplinary animist, and poet in disguise as herbalist. For 20 years and counting, Ash continues to reverently devote her life to fungal and botanical studies, encompassing traditional, academic, clinical, and directly relational terrains. Ash's approach places emphasis on plants, fungi, and planet as relations, and is manifested through her practice as fostering engagement with and as the living world, rather than using plants as commodity. She counsels and creates in her private practice Black Sage Botanicals. One-on-one long-term apprenticeships are the cornerstone of her training, with a focus in druid herbalism, clinical botanical medicine, and MacGyver-style urban and wilderness first aid. Ash also attended acupressure school, permaculture certification training, and studied journey work with Michael Harner, just to name a few of the adjunct teachings that inform her practice. Her bachelor's degree thesis in the early 2000s focused on botanical and fungal agents for initiation, and altered states as evolutionary technology. Over the years, Ash's research has honed in on entheogenic traditions of her ancestry, mainly the folklore and pharmacon of Amanita muscaria and the Solanaceae-laden flying ointments of Europe. Ash feels blessed beyond measure to have shadowed naturopathic Dr. Kenneth Profrock in his office for 2 years upon her relocation to the Sonoran Desert, and almost went to medical school, until coming to recognize the potency of keeping her practice out of bureaucratic matrices. Previously, she apprenticed with history buff and lineage keeper Charles Doc Garcia, and worked for several years as a plant-based personal chef and apothecarist in a bustling California Bay Area clinical herbal practice. In addition to the elders in her life, her most illustrious teachers are the landscapes, plants, and fungi themselves, desert, mountains, oceans, forests, rivers, and all the rest that rattle the ancestors alive in her bones. Ash is an avid solo traveler and owes so much of her enrichment to touching old rocks, listening to the echoes of ancient architecture, singing at sacred sites, eating traditional foods, and listening to people and plants wherever she goes. Ash currently lives in a century-old gnome house on an old ranch in southern Arizona, and enjoys tracking deer through spiny brush, sitting with 200-year-old cacti, and waiting for monsoon season thunderstorms as she writes her first book. Right, welcome, Ash. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you. It's fun to talk to you.
Yeah, you too. So I think we first met, you had some Patreon Zoom group thing, and I didn't really know much about you. My friend invited me. And I remember you were talking about Amanita, and then I chimed in because I love Amanita, and you were very familiar with the Amanita spirit, not just the chemistry and things like that. So every time I meet somebody who's really into the spirit of Amanita, I get super excited, and I was like, wow, we need to like have a whole podcast where we just dive deep on that. So I kind of just want to, focus on that. And yeah, just thank you for making the time today.
My pleasure.
Yeah. So you have been an herbalist for quite a while, and just like what got you started on the path of plant medicine, and where are you at today with it?
Oh gosh. I mean, as as anyone knows, it's a long and meandering and strange and wonderful story that could never be condensed into a nutshell. But one thing I like to joke about is I started getting into plants in the womb. Like my mom always tells me that she was obsessed with oranges when she was pregnant with me. So I feel like the first plant that I was blessed with was citrus.
Yeah.
But yeah, very long and meandering story short. I started consciously studying plants at a pretty young age. As a teenager, I started getting really into ethnobotany by way of looking at how plants and fungi have been and still are utilized in rites of passage and initiation. And as like a 16-year-old, 17-year-old, part of it was just a longing for a sense of place in a culture that I felt very disconnected from, the pop culture of the United States. So I started young and I started that way. So I'm actually an ethnobotanist first. So my interest has always been in the story, the mythology, the history, and looking at the history of people through the lens of plants and fungi. I mean, has been my favorite and will always be my foundation. But over the years and through a stream of very wild events, I got more and more and more into quote unquote practical herbalism. So I practice as both, right? I'm an educator in the field of ethnobotany, and I'm a practicing herbalist. More and more, I get to like do my work as a lecturer and things, but for many, many years, paying the bills involved like just doing practical herbalism support with people. So I can do both. I can do
Yeah.
both. And but I guess also to speak to how you introduced me in this space is I started as a psychonaut, and I started with the spirit and connecting in with plants and fungi in that interstellar terrain taught me how to be a human in a body on planet Earth. And as I started sinking into that, and I still sink into that, it gets me more and more excited about learning about phytochemistry, mycochemistry, all these like the little details that in the past I never thought I'd be capable of grokking, So
Yeah.
many stories, many things could be said, my friend.
Yeah. I mean, does it feel like you're saying like when you go out and it helped you gain an understanding of like how to be a human? Is it like the concept of as above, so below? Like you were getting that like divine blueprint, as it were, and the details of like the cosmos and the spiritual world to kind of like bring back and embody.
There's certainly that piece of the puzzle, but also I think it's in the joy of embracing the pendulum swing. You know what I mean? The joy of going so far. What is the Heart Sutra? It's like gone far beyond, gone to the other shore. So it's like getting
Yeah.
so good at going gone far beyond, off onto the other
And then
shore,
hail the goer, right?
and then shaboom, and then learning through slow and steady integration, and like, okay, how do I sit with this data from the gone far beyond as a human in a body? And wow, actually, like, behold this thing. This is actually really, really neat. And why have I been running from it? Why have I actually been, it's easier for me to fly.
Right.
So
Right.
I started, as a 16-year-old, 17-year-old, 18-year-old, I started to ask all of these big questions. Like, wait, why is it easier for me to be disassociated and disembodied? Which is, I mean, also a big part of my interest in Amanita muscaria and its definition as like a dissociative sedative, at least in its decarboxylated state, which again, I have things to say about that,
Yeah.
but
I
Yeah, I
want to
think
hear. But yeah. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, the pendulum going. I feel the same way about all of this. You know, very much so. A psychonaut as a teenager, and it was easier for me to be disembodied.
right.
Right? It's like I'll just slip away. The only thing that's holding me is a little thread, right? And like it's I think a form, I mean, for me, and kind of ended up having its own dark side of like being a form of escapism, right? Because I didn't like where I lived. I didn't like a lot of the people that I was around, and and so like kind of like going back to what you were saying earlier about how just like you were connecting with the plants, and it was like a sense of familiarity. And it reminds me of that funny shirt of it says introverted but willing to discuss plants. I was like,
Yeah,
that's me.
yeah,
um
absolutely.
but I think it's something, and I'd like to hear your feelings on this, is something about like Amanita being a dissociative, um like muscimol, but to me it feels like I'm really like in my body, right?
Same. Like the experience of I-ness when I first started settling in with Amanita muscaria was startling, because that's also not a comfortable place. I'm a very Aquarian person, so I-ness for much of my life has been a very uncomfortable place. Being okay, feeling like it's okay to take up space as a human in a body, right?
Mm.
Uh, so it is interesting, and I had to question myself. I was like, is this my trickster nature and everyone else disassociates and I feel like a real sensual thing, and
Yeah.
but the more I've built this relationship with this beautiful mushroom, and this beautiful mushroom intelligence, yeah, I would never label it as a disassociative. That's the trick, that's the joke, is I would never label it as such, even though you could open a book and it may say that.
Yeah, I
And
agree.
there's, I think, too, this I could ramble about this all day, but this idea of, like you said, as above so below. I feel like the Amanita muscaria drives me so down deep into the dark, I call it like the darkness technology place, where I think a lot of those notions are maybe misunderstood until you experience them, in
Mhm.
the sense that as below, it's like as below, so I can be like, I can drop into the womb of creation, the womb of the Mother Earth. And then all of a sudden I start to recognize my own womanness and my own wombness. And
Mm.
it's,
Yeah.
and then I recognize why I was longing for the stars, because actually it was that darkness that was so familiar, of the real matrix, which is the womb. You
Uh,
know what I'm saying?
yes.
That's like the real me.
Yeah,
So
100%. Yeah, I feel like it with Amanita, for me, it has dropped me into like it was funny because right before I started working with her, I and for me it's like feels feminine, it's not that way for everybody, but um when I started working with her, right before that, I just had this question of like, how do I see what I can't see?
mm.
And it was like, how do I, like how do I like turn the rock upside down and see the bugs underneath whenever what what do you have? Oh, I thought you were gonna
Oh.
grab a rock. um
Oh no, but I do have a rock close by.
I thought you had some rocks with some bugs. I was excited.
I do have rocks and bugs nearby. In fact,
Yeah,
if you see my house, I live in a rock.
it looks like it, yeah.
Yeah.
And I live in Stone Borough, so I have stones and rocks everywhere. So, but yeah, that was like a major pastime of my childhood, looking under
Mm,
rocks
mm,
and
mhm.
letting the bugs crawl all over me and playing with them.
Huh.
And my parents called me Bug Boy, and And so like, here I am, an adult, and I'm like trying to like turn over the rocks of myself and like see underneath.
Mm,
And I started asking the question like over and over again in my mind's eye, like, how do I see the unseen? How do I peer into the subconscious, into the darkness if it's dark in there? And then Amanita came into my life.
mm,
And like it was almost like an answer, like, okay, we're gonna give you some medicine for you to see that. And I've been
mm,
working with her for like 3 years, like pretty, adamantly and pretty like reverently. And, just recently started like holding ceremony for people. And it has been a massive deep dive into my own shadow work. And I'm just so grateful for this mushroom. And I just get so excited whenever I meet people like you. And there's like a few other people that are like, they really understand that spiritual relationship. It's interesting because not everybody gets it, you know?
I mean, for me, it's like I always say that curiosity is my ultimate like tonic in life, and I feel like that's the required, for me at least, that's the required ingredient of getting to know a plant or getting to know a mushroom or getting to know a mountain or getting to know a landscape, is this deep seated curiosity and that willingness to be that present and that surprised. And I think a lot of times people will, innocently impose or project, or layer in or parrot, things that they've heard about the thing, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, I feel like it's like to know something is to just be endlessly curious
Yeah.
and stay there. you
Yeah. Yeah.
know,
Yeah. And it's really easy to do that with, especially with this mushroom. I mean, I
yeah,
look,
it is.
there's so many layers to it. I mean, just from the mythology, the history, the different varieties, the different ways to prepare it or not prepare it,
Yep.
um, how
Yep.
many different ways we can consume and commune with this mushroom. And man, and it's like, and it's also like the same thing with any psychedelic, going back to the Native American saying, no man crosses the same river twice because it's not the same man and it's not the same river. And so it's like if I want to take uh, the same volume weight of mushrooms one day and then the same, the next week, it's going to be a different experience. I can't replicate that because it's in the past, it's gone. So the only thing that is here is this moment, and it's just ever evolving. And how we show up in that moment is different moment to moment,
That's
and
it.
it's always just like a moving target. So, um, yeah. So, like, when did you learn about Amanita muscaria, and was that kind of like the beginning of your curiosity, or did you put it on the shelf for a little bit?
It was fully elf on the it was fully elf on the shelf for a while. So like
Yeah, you're like, I'm
it
not going there.
was fully elf on the shelf. So when I was in college, I wrote my thesis on altered states as an evolutionary technology, and I really focused on psilocybe species because that was my true love.
Mhm.
And and I'd seen some of the writings, in the academic texts and such about muscaria, but I sort of placed it in the enchanted realm. I placed it in the realm of myth, and I had not really heard of any. I know Terrence mentioned it, McKenna mentioned it in brief sometimes, but I hadn't really heard of people ingesting it. This was in like the early 2000s, right? I hadn't heard of people ingesting it um, in the here and now. So I kept it in my awareness, and I always appreciated it for the folklore and the tales, but it wasn't until some years ago that I got a really, it's a long story, but I got a very, very clear message, and it went like this. It went like this. It just said, It said, study Amanita, it will connect you to your ancestors. And when I was like, what? It just kind of like came out of left field. It was when I was doing a sit with psilocybe mushroom, in fact. And I said, what? So I re-entered into the space of Amanita muscaria. This was maybe in 2018, into the space of Amanita muscaria, starting to dig into the history and the mythology. And I entered purely from that space, like, okay, let's check out, I'm of Bohemian descent, which is now like Czech Republic, Southern Poland. So I started looking there and I was like, okay, what's the mythology? What are the folk tales? What are the traditional names? Dig, 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 dig. And the more I started digging, the more I saw myself. The more I started digging, the more I realized that this was something so profound for the entirety of global history, hidden in plain sight. One of the best hidden in plain sight examples I could ever think of, emoji here, greeting card here, blah, blah, blah here. I mean, all
Pop
our
culture,
life,
children's books everywhere. Yeah.
We're so imprinted. We're so imprinted with this form and this image of this being. And yet there's this deep-seated, like, well, don't touch it though.
Right.
So that's when I started to break it down, and I'm like, well, by what authority? Who said don't touch it? Because a lot of people touch it, right? We can, and I think a lot of us start with the research in Siberia and the Hyperborean, stuff. And so I was like, yeah, like when and where was the don't touch it planted in the program? And as I started to unpack that, I was like, well, wait, now I want to touch it. Wait, now I need to touch it, because there's a secret here.
Yep. So you're going down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, it's a really, really continually unfolding, continually new adventure. But
yeah,
that's that's a very short answer for that.
Yeah, that was great. I mean, I feel very similarly about the ancestry thing. I've worked with most plant spirits, and it's kind of like, yeah, there's some ones that I'm like, I don't know about that, but like Amanita has been like later in my life, and as of recently. And for me, it was like, whoa, like I'm actually connecting to my ancestors. And it was weird because I was doing this, synchronistic deep dive, and then my dad's doing ancestry.com, and like I'm learning about like just different things with my Irish and Scottish heritage. And we found out that my ancestors like held land in Scotland, and they would go to war and like get naked and like yell at their enemies and run after them. I'm like, well, that sounds like a berserker. I mean, it's not Norway and Sweden, but like there's definitely, I think, Amanitas grow everywhere in Europe, and I mean even down in southern Portugal. And so it just kind of feels like this is the medicine of my ancestors. And that's really special because, as a white person living in America, I feel like I don't know what my heritage is. I don't know what my culture is. I don't know how to connect with my roots. And we see so many different, you know, I guess nations that live in this way have so much more mental health issues and so many more just feelings of lack. And the families that have multi generations living in the same household, and they have their traditions for hundreds and thousands of years, like they don't have as many of those issues. And so for me, it's like I'm going back to the beginning of our conversation, like I'm coming back into myself and something that I forgot, right? And so yeah, it's like a breath of fresh air to kind of connect back into my bones in that way. Yeah.
Even this notion of the message I got of Amanita, study it, it's going to connect you to your ancestors. And that has so many layers and so many meanings that continue to reveal themselves to me. But one of which was when I was invited to England to do an Amanita muscaria talk at Breaking Convention in this spring, earlier this year. And I'd never been overseas. I'd never been overseas before in that direction. So my great-great-grandfather, who I'm named after, lived in England, Ash Ritter, and that wasn't his original place, but all of a sudden I was like, oh, cool, I'm going on this stepping stone journey, and the Amanita's literally bringing me to where Ash Ritter lived, literally. So I get there, and I'm walking around the kind of lobby area of the conference, and I see this guy that I used to serve tea to at a tea house I worked at in San Francisco. This was, maybe 15 years ago or something. I see this guy and I was like, hey, man, what are you doing here? And he was like, what are you doing here? And we start talking. And he was like, hey, what are you doing after a breaking convention? I live in Prague. And if you need a place to stay, come through. And I was like, Prague, Czech Republic. I was like, that's literally where my ancestors are from. So now I go back in time. I keep hopping back in time on these stepping stones. So I went from England to Ireland, to Czech Republic. And I'm in Czech Republic and I'm having a mazillion synchronicities happening. I end up stumbling upon this Knights of Malta museum. My last name is Ritter, by the way, which means knight, like K-N-I-G-T.
Yeah.
And if you look up the coat of arms for Ritter, it says on the top in Latin, for the love of Malta. So I stumble into this Knights of Malta museum. I start realizing all these connections with the Rosy Cross. I start realizing all these connections with the churches that the Knights of Malta built that have tons of Amanita looking frescoes, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, well, shit, I've got to go to Malta now. So the Amanita brought me overseas and kept showing me all these stepping stones. And I went back. And so many things happened on that ancestral journey that wouldn't have been made possible unless I started teaching about the little and some stuff that I know about this beautiful mushroom. It keeps teaching me,
Right. Wow, that is incredible. And so I bet you really were feeling such a sense of wholeness, connecting with your roots, literally taking a step back in time, right? And
yes.
Wow.
And you know what, my friend, because I heard you say this a little while ago in our chat, was this feeling of, growing up in the United States, feeling or maybe not even feeling, but certainly being told that we've been divorced from our indigeneity. And I think that's so much why I began as a youngster studying rites of passage and initiation, as I was like, what the hell, And as soon as I got to Bohemia, as soon as I got to Czech Republic, I saw everything that I've always loved. I saw roses in bloom. I saw the hawthorn in bloom. I saw the apple trees in bloom. I smelled the food. I tasted the food. I touched the water of these rivers that are Celtic named rivers, by the way.
Yeah.
And I realized that I had actually never forgotten. I had never forgotten. It was subconscious.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, well, this is why I love roses. This is why I love hawthorn. This is why I love all of these things, because they're here. And this is the place of my people, so it was one of those. It wasn't even like I found a missing piece. It was like I was shown that I've been whole all along and I just temporarily forgot, and
That's so beautiful. I mean, it's like the only problem is the lack of recognition in the mind, right? And that's really just a problem for the mind, which has a cascade effect of issues for our sense of self and our body and our purpose and everything. But to kind of, it's like a cognitive dissonance where the mind's catching up, and That is so beautiful because it's like the memory is in our DNA, it's in our bones, it's in our soul.
Yep.
And connecting with these plant medicines can help us remember. I mean, that's literally all we're doing is remembering,
Yep.
right?
Big
And
time.
like I think the most profound and simple lessons I've learned from plant medicine is everything is love.
Hmm.
It's like no, like literally
Yeah.
your love. Your love and that person that you think you hate, that is that person's love too.
Haha.
Like, yeah, okay, hippie. All right, smoke another one. But but no, really.
Really. Well, and love has many faces. That's the trick. I think that's the like cosmic joke is love has many faces. And it's
Yeah,
all love.
right, right, right. Yeah, love doesn't, yeah, the universal love doesn't look like our personal love. That is, I mean, it can, but like, yeah, there's elements that we don't understand and maybe we can't, but we can appreciate it for what it is and have faith that it does have meaning.
That's
And
it. Yeah. It's like to me, it's like looking in bigger timelines than just an anthropocentric timeline based on our needs and our wants and our goals.
yeah.
Like the love of the intelligence of Gaia may look like earthquake, avalanche, solar flare, all kinds of crazy ass. And we may interpret it as humans as catastrophe because we don't like it for our own sense of continuity. But
Right.
there,
There's like greater timelines shifting
yeah,
and we just don't understand it. There's gears moving bigger than we can even imagine. Like
yeah,
the universe is playing multi-dimensional chess.
there it is. Oh yeah. And we're in a nice game right now.
Yes. Yeah, we are. And so like one theme that has been coming up with Amanita muscaria for so many people is the concept of time.
Hmm.
How would do you feel? I mean, it's almost like you're working with Amanita and like literally going back into like your ancestry and going back. I was hearing that, you're like taking the steps down memory lane. I
Oh,
mean, yeah, would you agree with that?
yeah. Well, and that's to me, like, that's even the funny joke. There's so many funny jokes in the poetry of the thing, but like, I was like, oh, I'm leapfrogging. And then I was like, oh, the frogs. Oh, the toadstool. Oh, the toadstool. And even like so much of my fascination around, I love etymology. So much of my fascination around Amanita muscaria's uh the spooky aura that it may have is like breaking down the words toadstool and mushroom and recognizing that they both actually have quite different um resonances. You know what I'm saying? Like even
Yeah.
looking at the word mushroom musaroon, it's like, oh, edible species, whereas toadstool, like that's the one that dirty toad sat on and it probably secreted some of its bufotenine in there and that's why it's going to make you die and all this
Uh,
venom. And so I think this for me, and this is a roundabout way of saying it, but when I think about the journey that this, not just this mushroom, but the plants and the fungi that I love studying and speaking on, they take me back in time to a pre-patriarchal. And don't get me wrong, I love men, but I mean like the pre-patriarchal, pre kind of Vatican
yeah.
imposing expression of global culture and belief systems. It's like these plants and this mushroom in particular has taken me back in time to remembering and unpacking and deconstructing the the mythology and the medicine ways um, that I think got totally connected in with women's work. The women, whether they were midwives or magicians, then being labeled as witches. I mean, so there's to me that aspect of the thing, where I see even just the study of it from this space and from the calling from this space, is bringing me back in time, you know.
Yeah.
I also have like literal stories of ingesting the mushroom and that stuff too, of course, but
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Yeah. And we can get into that. But I just wanted to just say that I think that, you know, you're familiar with the Kekion and the Eleusinian mysteries and like,
yeah.
yeah. So that's just like for the listeners. I mean, could you explain it? I mean, I could briefly explain it. But just the whole concept of like the point I was getting at was about the women passing on the medicine to their daughters, and it was word of mouth, that kind of thing, before, you know, the colonialism aspect.
Well, you know what's funny is like right now I'm teaching a class series on forbidden fruits, and last week I did a segment on pomegranates. So I ended up telling the Persephone and Demeter story about, you know, I think a lot of people know some chunks of the story, where Persephone is taken into the underworld and she's held captive there, and Hades feeds her some pomegranate seeds, and her mother Demeter, who's the goddess of like spring bounty and fertility of the land, is longing for her, and then ends up in Eleusis. She ends up on her quest trying to find her daughter, ends up in Eleusis, and then once she takes off her disguise and it's like, now you all know I am a deity, build me a temple here. So she goes up to this temple and yada yada yada. Anyway, Persephone gets liberated out. There's that whole story about the wheel of the year, but so it goes, Demeter then passed on this story of, this is a certain mystery practice that you shall have, and I'm not going to drink the wine, but I am going to drink the beer. You know, and this barley mint barley mint beverage. So, and
The Greek lean.
yeah, you know, so I mean, there are so many layers and puzzle pieces and questions still to the story of the Eleusinian mysteries. Needless to say, I suspect that so much of what we know of as Western culture was distilled through those practices. Distilled meaning they probably, to me, came from Nordic and African mystery traditions and then were synthesized through Plato and all those dudes. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And
Right.
their fathers. I'm like, well, they were, I don't know if
they're like the modern editors of the remnants of the ancient mysteries, right?
Great way to say it. The modern editors.
Yeah. Like they gathered it, you know. I mean, yeah, we had the Library of Alexandria burned down, like, unfortunately, but thanks Romans. They took out the Eleusinian Mystery School. Thanks Romans. Like, yeah, so here we are.
Here we are.
We get little fragments here and there, and yeah, it's like maybe it's just it's that cosmic wheel turning of you know, us really, I guess, kind of remembering, and I don't know why, but like reconnecting. I don't know, maybe it just needed to the you know, wipe the slate clean kind of thing. And where are we now? So yeah, wow, we could get really deep with all that, but
I know, I just went a few places. I'm like, I think part of it, at least to me, is this, you know, as far as in the colonized mind, we've so intellectualized or medicalized so many of these beautiful entheogens, to the point where I think some of the shards had to get, or the threads had to get a little tangled and frayed for us to be like, well, I'm just going to F around and find out. Now let me try and explore and learn this thing through my body, because like there's all this static and all this noise and everyone's just repeating Gordon Wasson over and over and over or whatever, you know, and And at a certain point, I'm like, you know what? We got to take it into our own
Just
hands, my
break it
friends.
down. Yes.
And there's utility in all the disciplines of study, right? Like I love books. I love being a direct experiencer too.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I
Love
mean,
it
it's
all.
literally it's the pendulum, right? It's the pendulum going back and forth from order to chaos, order to chaos, order to chaos, back and forth.
Mhm.
And yeah, when we get too orderly, I mean, it's like, things that are too rigid, they are not they're not able to withstand change. They like a house that's too rigid will collapse in an earthquake, but a
Yep.
house that can fluctuate and shift and move, those are the ones that actually survive. And it's the same thing with anything, really. So yeah, I think it's like the mind is like creeping up around the experiences, like the collective mind's creeping up around the intuitive experiences, and we need to shake it up. And then like for new generations, like you said, like let's fuck around and find out and get back in touch with our body and our intuition and find how these plants work with us through that experience.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's always a silver lining.
Yep.
Yeah, it's just a matter of if we can see it or not. So um well, so I'd love to hear about, and if you wanted to share any kind of like deep experience that you may have had that you think that the listener might benefit from hearing, I would love to hear something.
Okay. Um, I mean, that's always a hard thing to share in the sense of which story to tell.
Hmm.
But when I was sitting anticipating our conversation, I got the gut feeling of which story I'll tell, which is I have a really deep interest in the flying ointment traditions of Europe. And this was actually the segue for me between my intellectual and psychonaut study of plants and fungi into the I'm going to take this into my own hands and really literally and really and really experiment in a different way. So the flying, for those that don't know, the flying ointments or the witches ointments or the anointing oils. I mean, we hear about anointing oils in the Bible, right?
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of these balms that we associate with Eastern European so-called witches were nightshade based or solanaceae based, really, really, really strong plants that have very strong psychoactive properties. Also, some of them could be lethal, but also
like
many of
like datura or nightshade.
like datura, like henbane, like belladonna, like mandrake.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
so as I started like digging into that practice of the history side of it, I started finding stories of people saying, well, there was also the addition, trying to find recipes basically. Um, and some people say Amanita muscaria was in these balms. Some people don't. So I've been just digging, as for years still, digging, like, was there the presence of fungi in any of these balms, which were, by the way, utilized on the mucosa for the best absorption. So that would usually be vaginally. Sometimes it'd be in the armpits, sensitive areas, right?
Right.
That's why they're called flying ointments, is the story is told that witches would use
Right.
the broom to apply these ointments
Right.
vaginally and then they would go fly, right? They'd get high. So the Amanita muscaria, and I had seen a few of the recipes say that there was some ash put into these balms. And I saw a few references. I thought, oh, maybe it's an ash, like it's an alkaline substance to catalyze some of the chemistry.
Yeah.
And then other things were like, no, actually, this was either spores or fungi. So I went to those two directions. I was like, was it ergot, mold? Was it Amanita muscaria, maybe pulverized, powdered up, or maybe somehow heated up or calcinated in some way?
Right.
So, long story short, I started making Amanita muscaria loops. And this is something I don't normally talk about because my like baseline thing is like do no harm, and I'm not trying to tell everyone like, hey, go insert, go insert stuff, but I started experimenting with topical preparations of Amanita muscaria. And at first, I would administer it to my clients in my herbal practice for sciatica and nerve pain and things like this. But on the DL and on the side, I was exploring like, what would it be like to experience this mushroom from a deeply embodied place? And the interesting thing too is with some of these topical or in the mucous membrane applications, there's not necessarily a strong psychoactive effect. It's very dose dependent. It's very, and everyone be very careful. It's very dose dependent. But at first it was kind of this thing of, what would it be like to meet this mushroom in a place of pleasure and in a place of being in my body? Simple as that. Simple as that. And not even for this craving of like, I want to get blasted or I want to go to space, but actually I want to come home. I want to come home and down in, literally, down into my physical being, and then ask the mushroom, and sorry if this is TMI for some people, but it's like to ask the mushroom, like, what would it be like to be penetrated by you, mushroom? Like, take me, so it's a really interesting, even when earlier we were talking about that space of curiosity, I feel like oftentimes, whether it's herbalism or entheogen enthusiasts, it's like, I take this plant, I take the mushroom, and I'm like, no, take me.
Take
No,
me.
take me.
Yeah, right.
Like, show me, and so even that gesture of allowing myself to be in that, not submissive, but kind of allowing myself to be on that in that receptive space, I feel like is the foundation of how I've been able to learn so much about Amanita muscaria, is allowing it, rather than me trying to like impose my the gears of the mind upon it, is more, again, from that feminine, felt, embodied, present awareness and deep curiosity. So to me that feels really important, and it's, again, like, it's a larger maybe statement. It's less so about like, hey, I made an Amanita muscaria lube, and it's more about like this statement of how can we learn to be humbled by and receptive to these beautiful fungi and plant beings, and receive their intelligence in different ways than the grabby, takey, fix me, heal me. There's a certain point where it starts to get a little bit needy, in my opinion, and especially with the sort of overculture conversation about psychedelics and, it's for PTSD, it's for trauma, it's for this. And I'm like, hey, Amanita muscaria is freaking incredible for trauma, hypervigilance states. Like, we could talk all day about freaking muscimol and that, but there's a certain point too where I want to say, you know what, just show me. I don't need to take anything from you. I actually want to make offerings to you and give to you, and like pour forth libations to you, whether that's in a erotic context or in a poetic context, So it's a it's a statement I'd like to make.
Yeah.
More so than telling people like, I don't know, my lube recipe, which I may one day, but
I love this. This is just
Mhm.
so fantastic. I mean, I you're literally talking about like this relationship that culturally we have with, plant medicines. It's almost like we have this like codependent relationship with them.
Yep.
and and like almost like we are narcissistically, you know, um just take,
Mhm.
and instead of like literally I'm writing down the word receptive whenever you're saying receiving and being receptive, and taking a back seat, right? And like being submissive to the lesson, like like plant mushroom teach me, like come into me, come into my being,
Mhm.
and like as a, you know this body, I'm a male, and it's like easy for me to just be like, take, and as soon as I started working with Amanita, it was like sit the fuck down and listen.
Mhm.
And I was
Mhm.
like, okay, all right, like like teach me, like teach me, please. And like I feel like Amanita is like this like mistress, like she's like she's like, taking me by the hand into the underworld of myself, like, okay, I'll
Mhm.
go with you.
Mhm.
And she slapped me around a few times, and I needed it. It was good. And that, talk about etymology. I always say I'm gonna need it, like whatever it is, I'm gonna need it. And then, sometimes, you're talking about toadstools and mushrooms and the scariness. It's like I always say muscaria, like must scare you sometimes.
Ah, ah.
Whatever
I
it
mean,
is, I'm gonna need it. And yeah, it must
yeah.
scare you. But um
Oh
not to
yeah.
get off, I really was really liking that vein we were touching on. And yeah, just I think culturally coming from, where we are in America and how we are with everything, to even talk about the concept of being receptive to a plant and to listen to a plant, is so foreign for so many people. We have this epidemic of really, really awful Amanita muscaria products out on the market now.
Yeah.
Like horrible products that like
Spooky.
most of them.
That's the spooky stuff. That's the real spooky.
Yeah, yeah. And it's like it's literally all these companies that came from the CBD world, which they bastardized that plant first, and now they're going on a crusade of what's the next legal entheogen that we can exploit. And it just so happened to, perk their interest. And so it's like, yeah, we got kava, kratom, blue lotus, amanita, like, and it's just like we're seeing this just literally internalized colonialism
Yep.
happening with plant medicine. And I feel like there's such a grace that comes from the plants themselves. They're like, okay, we're gonna do that again. All right. I mean, we're getting spread around and people are learning about us, but this is not the way. I mean, this is like what we're talking about is like literally occult knowledge. I mean, it's hidden in plain sight. I feel like some people, like even Terrence McKenna, I actually didn't really appreciate what he said about Amanita.
Mhm.
He was like, yeah, it's just like, I got a headache and I'm sweating, and it's, take 5 dried grams, like psilocybin, and like don't worry about this other mushroom. And I'm kind of like, well, good. The people who, like they'll do what they need to do. And Amanita's, it's like ancient medicine, like one of the most ancient mushrooms, ancient plant spirits that we have worked with. And it will be here for those who are receptive. And I think that that's really like when the gifts start coming in, right?
Yeah, and I'm super present with you, and I'm also just laughing in my mind hearing Terrence being like, "You want elves, you get elves," and I'm like, there's a certain kind of like he got elves. He got elves through the DMT path, you know, and I'm like, you want elves, you get elves. You can get elves. You can get elves and gnomes from many. There are many paths to achieve make contact with interdimensional beings. And I know Terrence, you know, when I think about Terrence, I'm like, he got elves, you know, like he was happy with how he got elves.
Right.
He didn't
Right.
understand how to get elves with Amanita muscaria, and you know, that's all right.
Yeah, exactly.
He
Right.
got elves.
Right. Yeah. He found his elves and he was happy about it.
Found his elves.
And I just the working with Amanita on a business level, and I think you do too now, and you work with clients.
Mhm.
I've seen a theme of people that come at me like very hyper masculine, of like how much to take to trip, or how do I get fucked up on this? And I'm like, it's not like that. Like, you should go try some LSD or some psilocybin or something if that's what you want. But like, I mean, yeah, you can trip on Amanita, but it's not going to be like a fun time necessarily. Like,
And
I've
it's like
been,
how I don't know how many emails. I mean, we can joke about this probably all day. It's like how many emails, you know, have we sent out and disappointed people? You know what
oh
I
my
mean?
God.
They're like, just so you know, it might actually be like work. Like you might just have really, really the most visceral nightmares you've ever had in your life. You know, just so you know. And go ahead if you want to, you know, and but
Yeah.
that's even like I love thinking about I love thinking about the presentation of Amanita muscaria. There's so many things I could say. From cap to cap to cap to cap to cap, right? The presentation of the chemistry is going to be wildly different. And in one way, I feel like that's a built-in protection mechanism in the intelligence of this being, is that it asks of us every single time to test our concoctions. It asks of us every single time to go slow and to listen, because yeah, like we said in the beginning, it's like yesterday's dose is not today's dose. And I love how, you know, it's quite different than the new hybridized cannabises where you're like, it's 28% THC. It's like, well, you know, maybe this batch of this tincture is this certain amount, but hey, next harvest, I don't know what it's going to be yet. We gotta just sit with it and pay attention. So there's that certain personality of the so-called poison plants and the so-called poison mushrooms that um quite tickles my fancy. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah, it's like it's like literally a middle finger to the way that we do things. And it's so funny because like ibotenic acid and muscimol is incredibly hard to test for.
Mm.
Like like the lab results are like all over the place. Like I know people working in labs and they're trying to figure out the standards, and it's just like, nah, like you don't like this thing, like, I'm pointing to my head for people listening, like don't listen to that. Like tap into here, tap into your heart space. And it's like, to start somebody on the path working with Amanita, like unless they come into it like from this, like, a lot of weird synchronicities happen for people to come in to work with Amanita. And then there's other people that are like, kind of like, I don't know what to do. Like, what is this like? And then like you see these stupid articles like it's the Delta 8 of mushrooms. And it's like, it's like, get the fuck out of here. Like,
Oh, boring. It's
how do I convey this to, get the most return on my investment, and do customer like appeasement? And it's like, no, like this isn't that kind of a thing. And like you know, it's like they're trying to be, they're trying to make it that thing, and a lot of the companies put other drugs in them, unfortunately, and we have some lab tests that prove that. And you know, it's just, it's 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 just, I think that the people who are looking for the next high, they're going to go on to the next thing, but the people who are really like all about the medicine, like they come into it from a different way. And I'm sure that you have people come into you, like meeting you and like coming to you like, hey, I just like heard about this mushroom, and then like, and then I saw something about you, and then like now I'm like talking to you, and like you have this mushroom for sale, and like how do or like, you know, like do you experience that? Like,
It's from so many different angles. And I mean, to me, that's even why I spend more time lecturing about mythology and history and folklore than I do um, chemistry, although I do a bit of that as well. But I think to create this sparkle around the enchantment, the aura of enchantment around this
mm,
mushroom is really fun for me. And I think that having that be a spark for some people can be really neat, because enchantment means, there's an amazing J.R.R. Tolkien quote where he says enchantment isn't an idea, it's a place. It's a place that we get taken to when we read the enchanted tales. We're taken into the enchanted realms, and
mm,
we ourselves become enchanted. You
mm,
know what I'm saying? So
yeah,
it's a really interesting back and forth, my friend, because of course I have people who are like chronic pain clients, and you know, the herbalist side of my brain says there is utility and a point to sort of kind of standardized extracts. Like I get that, but one hand, you know, must go to me with the other, and there's no separating the thing. And we may use different terminology with different clients, right, or different audiences, but
right,
at the end of the day, I'm like, at the end of the day, Amanita muscaria is a beautiful, dynamic, trickster being. And we could call that ibotenic acid or muscimol. We could call that, you know, the realm of the gnomes. We could call that whatever we want, but it is what it is, what it is.
yeah,
And so, yeah, but yeah, people come to me from lots of different, you know, let me say it like this. I used to have a little bit of cynicism and a chip on my shoulder when I saw people who I felt like were disrespecting mushrooms or disrespecting plants or disrespecting our beautiful Mother Earth. And more, I stay open to this possibility of, like, you know, Haile Selassie said, who can foresee the spark that will ignite the flame? And every now and again, I have to return to that quote, is who can foresee the spark that will ignite the flame? Like maybe someone's coming in super rude and selfish and like, I just want to
aggro,
die. And then they take it, and all of a sudden that's the spark that ignites the flame. And they're like, actually, I'm curious. Actually, I want to know more about myself and the world. Actually, so
yep,
I don't know. I have to catch myself sometimes, because I do feel like a really protective mama bear of these beautiful, you know, ancient intelligences that have made my life so amazing, you know, and worth living and loving. And but yeah, sometimes the protective thing, I have to sort of step back and trust the intelligence of these mushrooms and these plants. And that's, you know, like, oh my gosh, okay, like
yeah.
let me step out the way. I'm a little old me.
Right. And it's like going back to what you're saying about the interdimensional chess and the
Yeah.
great cosmic gears working in ways that we have no idea. Creator working upside down and sideways, and we're just like, what the fuck? You know, like I don't anymore, but I used to get real bent out of shape whenever every time I would see a new Amanita mushroom gummy. I would just
Oh,
like flip out. I'd be like, these fucking assholes, like they're
yeah.
just bastardizing it, and like they're putting other drugs in it. And like I'm an
Um,
admin in this big group, and like people come to us and they're like, you know, this is like, I'm like seeing visuals off of one guy, and I'm like, that's, and now I'm just like, Oh, it's free advertising for Amanita.
Mm,
I mean, yeah, maybe they get confused and maybe they have to figure out, oh, that actually wasn't Amanita or that was a bad product or
right.
whatever. But like it's pushing, it's free advertising for Amanita for the people who are actually curious about this mushroom. They will
Mm,
find it and it will come to them in ways that we can't know. If you I mean, I could briefly share a little bit if you'd like to hear how I came into working with Amanita.
mm-hmm,
Was that I had basically I had one night where I knew I needed to quit smoking cannabis. I had been
mm-hmm.
smoking weed my entire life, all day, every day. And
Yep.
then somebody like that night I knew I had to quit. And
Mm,
also coincidentally, somebody said, have you microdosed Amanita muscaria? And I was like, why would I do that? That's a poisonous mushroom. And I was already an herbalist, mushroom extractor person at that point. And two other people within the next month had come up to me and also said that. And I started weaning off. And so it was just in that way, just these little gentle nudges of curiosity. And then I got a little more curious, and the curiosity has continued to lead me into this path of understanding the many layers of nuance that just one being has.
well, and lest we forget, I think this is the thing too that I like to drive home with folks is like, especially for those who approach Amanita muscaria in the wanty grabby way. I'm like, lest we forget that it is a mycorrhizal intelligence, meaning that it lives not as like a standalone island, but a being that loves living in relationship to whatever it is, conifers, living in relationship to oaks, living in relationship to ash trees, and this idea of now engaging with this mushroom as a relational consciousness to me really expands the potentials and our horizons when we engage, when we sit with this mushroom. We're not, to me, when we sit with this mushroom, we're not just sitting with the mushroom, we're sitting with whatever chemistry it exchanged with that pine tree and what the rolling hillside was like and how much sun did it get and what animals were crapping on the ground near it, and all of these things inform what looks like this really like handsome fruiting body, and
Most gorgeous mushroom on earth.
it is a handsome fruiting body, but it's so much more. And that's that masculine, right? Everyone's looking at that masculine phallus and we're like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Look at
yeah.
that. Look
But
at that
then
hog.
look at that. But then underground, there's this there's this endless sea of 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 beautiful wisdom connection, the wisdom of connection. And that's that underworld, that's that feminine, that's that, oh, we don't want to talk about that because that goes against the entirety of our culture and religions and so to me that's like that piece to as I get to remember and trust that and remind people, like, don't just engage with it as this like beautiful big dick, like engage with it as this antennae into the entire terrain of creation. And that to me changes, I had an elder once say to me, he's like, don't take more medicine, make the medicine stronger. And what he meant was make it stronger
Yeah.
by recognizing its power and potency. And that's where, everyone's going to get a different thing out of the same
Yeah.
droplet.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow.
We could just
I feel
talk.
like, I mean, I just, we should just probably end it here, right? I mean, it's been a
Yeah,
little over an hour. You have medicine to send off to the post office.
I do.
and I want to make sure that your clients are medicated with all the goods. And like, just talking about the energy and the philosophy and the mythology and like all these like deeper tones, like that's really what I wanted to talk to you about. I mean, yeah, we don't need to like get into the weeds and like, yeah, like chemistry and stuff like that. Like these kind of conversations are so important because I can, we can both rattle off the facts, right? But like the richness of experience, the nuance of the relationship with this ally, those are the kind of things that I think are the stories untold. And it's like we're giving people now a glimpse into some real stuff. And like all the other stuff is like up here and we're just like whoom, like we're down there with the mycelium. So yeah, we'll just have to have another conversation at another point. And
Sounds
yeah,
good.
so anyway, I want to thank you for being here, doing the work that you do. It is so important that we have people like you in this world. Thank you for answering the call to the plant path, and may you continue to walk this journey with grace.
Thanks, bud. We're in it together.
Yes. All right. Peace.
Peace.
Thanks for enjoying another episode of the Gab Lab. If you made it this far, please like and subscribe, share it with your friends, leave us a 5-star review. It all helps the algorithm. If you want to follow us on Instagram, it's gablab.show, and there are other links in the show notes. Please follow the guest, and we will see you in the next episode.
Gab Lab.